Okay, how's everybody doing this evening? Of course, my name is Kent. The channel is Bitcoin EOS San Diego, but I just got to making a video about Bitcoin. So, as I stated in that video, I'd like to do two subjects on this channel. One, about the cryptocurrency, which I've been making videos about for about 5-6 years, and the other one about what I kind of find, which is kind of like my pastime, which is watching football, not professional football, but more college football, which is Nebraska football. So this video is about Nebraska football. I'll change the title as to what I'm making a video about that night. If it's about Bitcoin and you're into Nebraska football, don't watch the video. If it's about Nebraska football and you're into Bitcoin, don't watch the video because it's about Nebraska football. So what I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about Rhule, and of course I want to talk about Raiola, because that's been the main topics everybody's been talking about with Nebraska football. And I'll give you a little bit background about myself. I grew up in western Nebraska. I actually grew up in a little town called Mitchell, which is the hometown of Brock Knutson, which is a lineman that they recently recruited. I grew up in the early 60s. I watched Nebraska football all the way through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Kind of got away from it because we moved to California. But, of course, once a Nebraska fan, always a Nebraska fan. Something unique about it, I think it's in the water. Once you get that in your blood, you can't get it out. So, yeah, I've always watched him, always very interested in it. There's about 10-15 years, which I kind of didn't watch very often because both my sons were wrestlers and Saturday was wrestling day. And so we never watched Nebraska football. But since when Frost got hired, I kind of started watching it again. And then, of course, my brother-in-law moved back out here from Nebraska. And when he moved back out, I started watching it again because my brother-in-law is, I swear, the greatest Nebraska football fan in all of Nebraska football land. I mean, he is the pinnacle of Nebraska football fan. He knows everything about Nebraska football, literally remembers almost every play, I think. I'm exaggerating, but literally remembers about everything. I think he told me, he's a little bit older than I am, started watching Nebraska football in the mid-60s, and he's literally listened to every football game, Nebraska football game, since. So he's never missed a game, and he can recite things I can't even describe how he does it. But he's got literally a memory for Nebraska football like none other. Almost like a photographic memory for Nebraska football. I always laugh because I go over there and I talk to him about something. He goes, "Oh yeah, that was the year that they did this or they did that, and they lost to so and so in the Peach Bowl, or they won. That's the year they lost in the Orange Bowl." And he remembers everything. So anyway, talking to him kind of re-interested me in Nebraska football. So I want to talk about it a little bit tonight. And the other thing too is. I haven't been making a lot of videos. I made a few videos earlier about Nebraska football, but you know what? It's been so cold here in California, I think I'm back in Nebraska. In fact, I think it's kind of funny because all the Nebraska players that from warm climates, they're always, whenever they ask them to interview them on one of those redcasts or podcasts or something, they always complain about the weather. Well, let me tell you, the California weather hasn't been so great. I feel like half the time here, the last few months, I've been in Nebraska, not California. But I am in California. Actually, I'm in Carlsbad, which is interesting that I'm in Carlsbad, California, because there's a young man from Carlsbad High School who's their starting quarterback. I think his name is Justin Sayan, and he's the #1 recruit for Alabama. So in this town that I'm standing in right now, where my sons went to school, where we live, they have the #1 quarterback in the country. I think he's #1 from a class either after or before Dylan Raiola, and he's from Carlsbad. He's going to Alabama. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But I want to talk about Dylan Raiola for a second because I watched his, and my opinion is Dylan Raiola probably will end up at Nebraska eventually. If he doesn't end up in Nebraska right out of high school, I think he will on a rebound if he goes to another school. Because if he goes to Georgia or USC, they're going to continue to recruit quarterbacks. That anything at all. I mean, look at Spencer Rattler. He goes to Oklahoma and he loses his spot. I mean, Spencer Rattler was the greatest thing in the world, and then he loses his spot. Well, that could very easily happen to Dylan Raiola if he goes to one of these other schools. And Scott Frost went to Stanford before he came back to Nebraska. So it's very likely that if Dylan Raiola goes someplace else, he could end up. But I'm thinking he's going to go to Nebraska straight out of high school. But I would make one thing I would say is that I think a lot of people are putting way more way more emphasis on Dylan Raiola than they probably should. And for two reasons. First of all, he is a high school kid, and we don't know how it's going to turn out. Look at a guy like, they're talking really a lot about the tight end, Fiona. I think the kid out of, Council Bluffs, I can't remember his name, it's begins with an F. But anyway, here's a kid who come out of Council Bluffs. He's #1 recruit in the tight ends, and he doesn't play because he's got two new injuries. Got a train coming through. So he doesn't play for a couple years. Now it sounds like he's the man. Sounds like he's going to rise to the occasion, and everybody's talking about how great he is, how he's looking in practice. So you don't know. So putting all your faith in Dylan Raiola coming to Nebraska and saving the program, I think that's a little bit outside of, where, the program's best interest, to tell you the truth. Not to mention the fact that I've watched, not a lot, but I watched some of his high school tape, highlights, and he seems like he's a great passer. But I don't know that he's so fleet of foot. I mean, it seems like he's not quite as much of a scrambler as maybe a Jeff Sims or some of these other quarterbacks, or an Adrian Martinez. But I don't know if he fits as well in the quarterback role as somebody like Matt Rhule would want, because it seems like Matt Rhule wants a dual threat quarterback, and Dylan Raiola seems like he's pretty much a passer, even though it looks like he can run, but he doesn't look like that's really his thing, more like a Casey Thompson. I mean, Casey Thompson can run, but Casey Thompson doesn't usually. He'll run only when he has to run, but that's not his thing. And I think Dylan Raiola is the same way. So Raiola may not be the perfect fit for what Nebraska wants to do in the future, especially if they want a dual threat quarterback. So putting so much time and effort into Dylan Raiola, even though I do think he's going to be there, and I do think he'll be there eventually, I think it's kind of something right now that's not it's not going to make or break the program. And I think they got other things going on. Now, I made a video not too long ago about, and this is back when Mickey Joseph was quarterback, when he was coach, hoping that he'd get the job, because I went to a game actually one time with Mickey Joseph, and when he was quarterback, when he played against Colorado. It's a pretty good game. I always liked Mickey Joseph. Thought he was a charismatic kind of friendly guy to listen to and talk to. So I wasn't really on the Matt Rhule bandwagon right from the very beginning. But the more I've watched Matt Rhule, I think he is probably a good choice. In fact, especially, and what really sealed the deal for me was when they had Trev Alberts is doing a great job. I mean, he probably is. I mean, I'm not a big Trev Alberts fan. The reason I'm not a big Trev Alberts fan is because I didn't go to the Lincoln campus. I went to the UNO, the Omaha campus. And he was the athletic director at UNO, and he killed their wrestling program. And of course, my sons were both wrestlers, and I'm into wrestling. And UNO had a really good wrestling program, like one of the best in the country. I think they were Division II national champions. And he get rid of the UNO wrestling team in favor of a hockey team. So, I always kind of held that against Trev Alberts, but he claims that's just the way they had to do it. But anyway, back to Matt Rhule. I think the more I listen to him, the more I think he probably is a fit for this job. He's looks like more of a college kind of coach than he's a pro coach. So I think he's probably a good fit. And, I just think that hopefully it works out. Like I say, I think people right now, most of the content's focused on Dylan Raiola. And just to tell you a quick story, I remember when a friend of mine and I went to Nebraska, I think it was Akron, one of the first games of the year they won the national championship. Scott Frost was quarterback. And one of the first games, I believe, was Akron. And I remember I was walking around Memorial Stadium, and who did I run into? I run into Tommy Frazier. And of course I stopped him, asked him, talked to him for a little bit. But there were two things I thought of when I saw Tommy Frazier, and two things first. One of the things that he was taller than I thought he would be, and the other thing, he was a lot leaner than I thought he would be, and he was had more length than I thought he would have. When I saw him, when you look at him running up and down the field in the Orange Bowl, he looks pretty stocky, but when you met him in person, he looks more like a basketball player than he did a football player. Whereas a guy like Dylan Raiola, he looks more like a football player than a basketball player, and he doesn't look like a quarterback. He looks more like he's probably a linebacker than a quarterback. So, these guys, sometimes, they don't have sometimes you're looking for a certain person to fit that role, and that person has to have the right body measurements, the right dimensions, the right things. Just like I was watching the basketball national championship, and with the guys from, I never watched basketball, but I did watch it because San Diego State was in the finals, and I'm in San Diego. So everybody, it was kind of like a thing here. And it usually isn't. California usually isn't into stuff like that, but they did make mention of it a few times, and I said, well, I'll watch it because it is San Diego. Now, remember when UConn won, the guys from San Diego State kept saying, wow, they had length, they could reach, they could block, they could do so many things. They had great reach. And that's kind of the way I thought of Tommy Frazier when I saw him. He's like, this guy's got tremendous reach. I mean, he's just like, he's long-legged, he's like long arms. He's just seems like he's got a lot of, and how you doing? And so that's what I thought about. How you doing? There we go, Carlsbad, California. So back to Matt Rhule. So anyway, yeah, you got to have the right person to do it. And I think he'd be a durable quarterback. And I do think he'll end up in Nebraska, but I just don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to happen. And I don't know if it's all that important at this point. So hopefully they get somebody. I mean, it sounds like Matt Rhule might be starting to think about maybe trying to get another quarterback in or not. I don't know. Who knows? But anyway, you can see Rhule has a little bit different way of doing things than like Scott Frost. I think Frost came in from UFC or UCF, and he just wasn't prepared to come to a place like Nebraska and take over a program like Nebraska. And now you can kind of see what it looks like with a guy that really is ready to go with Matt Rhule. So hopefully that all works out. I think Rhule will probably be a lot better than Frost was. I think Frost had an opportunity to be good. I mean, if he would have picked up on Joe Burrow, when Joe Burrow was looking for a school, I mean, it's unbelievable. Joe Burrow, one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of college football, gets turned down by the University of Nebraska twice. That shows you how badly the program's been managed the last 20 years. I mean, a guy, the greatest, and don't forget about the fact that the guy had his father and two brothers play in the program. He had legacy in the program, and then he tries to get in right out of high school. He gets turned down, I think, by Riley, and then he tries to get in again. And Frost says, "Hey, look, you don't think we got better quarterbacks than this kid?" Who ends up winning the Heisman at LSU. Everybody goes, well, he wouldn't have won at Nebraska because, he didn't have the players around him that he had at LSU. But the point being is they needed an experienced quarterback. They didn't have it in Adrian Martinez. Adrian Martinez is a great person. I listened to him talk, and he's got great character. But, he was basically a junior out of high school stepping into the Big Ten. And that was too much for him. It's too much for anybody. And if you would have taken a person like Joe Burrow, who already had some reps in the Big Ten, bring him into Nebraska and let him have a little competition with Adrian Martinez, man, I think that would have been a great thing. And, at that time they had a few receivers. I mean, not the kind of guys like he had at LSU, but they had a few guys that could catch the ball. And I think if Frost would have taken that direction, he would have been all right. But I think Frost's biggest problem is he just had a lot of arrogance, and he wasn't going to let anybody tell him what to do. And of course, his idea was he was going to go with Adrian Martinez, whatever. It didn't matter, what if it was working or not working. He was going to stick with Adrian Martinez, and he was going to stick with his coaching staff too that he brought up from UCF. And I don't know how well that was working out either. He'd been better off if he'd pick coaches that were more prepared for the Big Ten. But anyway, he's gone. Too bad, because the guy was like Mr. Nebraska football. Winning the championship in '97. I mean, I think everybody loved him in Nebraska. Now I don't think, I think he bought a house in Arizona, and I don't think he's going to be coming back to Nebraska for vacations. So that's too bad. Too bad it had to work out that way, but it had to work out that way for the reason. And now we got Matt Rhule. So I'm pushing for Matt Rhule. I hope he makes it. I mean, I'll be watching. I'll be talking about it. Hopefully make a few videos about it. And I hope Dylan Raiola comes aboard. I'm so glad they got Malachi Coleman. I love that kid. I think he's got a good story. He's got a good personality. He wants to give back to the community. I mean, the fact that he's sticking to Nebraska, and even in their downtimes when everybody else is kind of like looking at Nebraska thinking, well, wonder what's going to happen with Matt Rhule. Malachi Coleman committed under Mickey Joseph. He stayed with that commitment under Matt Rhule. And I'm telling you, if there's anybody I'd like to see make it in the NFL and college football, would be Malachi Coleman. I'll be rooting for him more than anybody, I think, because I really like his personality, and I think he's a good kid. And I think he's the kind of kid we need at Nebraska. Somebody that really wants to be at Nebraska, not because they're a great program and they're winning lots of games. He wants to be at Nebraska because he thinks this is that's his home. He feels like this is. In fact, he always says it. He says, stay at home, stay at home. You know. And so I think that's the kind of guys they need. They need guys like that. They could have used a kid like Danny Woodhead. They could have used those kind of guys, but they let those guys go. Especially that kid from. I say kid, I shouldn't, but they are kids to me. The guy from Council Bluffs, that was at TCU, they let that one slip away too. They let too many guys slip away. And I think Rhule's stopping that. Right now, going around visiting all these high schools, he's stopping the big sieve of players leaving the University of Nebraska and going someplace else and establishing relationships within the state. And I think that's something that Frost needed to learn, never did learn. And that's the reason why Frost is in Arizona and Matt Rhule's in Lincoln, Nebraska. I appreciate you watching. Thank you very much.